we've got one of the top guys in the nation in terms of intelligence and defense. I have with me Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer. He is a Bronze Star Medal recipient and Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. He's a CI-trained senior intelligence operations officer with more than 25 years of experience in the intelligence community. Currently, he is a senior fellow and special lecturer at the Center for Advanced Defense Studies in Washington, D.C. Colonel Shaffer, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having
It's
me.
it's my pleasure. You've condescended to come down to the sort of
no, not at all. Hey, look, I enjoy any time I can talk to folks about the war and how to improve things, and I always enjoy talking about my book. So
right.
Whatever you'd like to talk about, I'm good to go.
Well, the book was great. I finished it up today. I bought it over the weekend, read it last night and today, and
Cool.
I don't know if you noticed, but when I bought my copy, and I don't know if your typewriter is broken or something, but a lot of this there's like a lot of black streaks. I don't know if.
Well, if you put vinegar on it, it'll develop. So.
Okay.
That's a joke, obviously. So.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about that, what makes the book really fascinating is, according to the New York Times, they put out a story that that the defense agency was going to apparently buy up the first 10,000 copies and possibly destroy them because there were elements that they thought were harmful to national security. And so what ended up was a redacted copy. Is that right?
That's correct. And they did buy them up, and they did destroy them, and we're preparing to sue DoD over the First Amendment violations because we not only strongly believe that there's nothing classified in there, we believe the entire event was meant to suppress my First Amendment rights rather than actually do anything to protect national security, based on the fact that everything I'm aware of in the book was available either in some open source somewhere, or it was obtained through interviews of other folks who were there. And I actually did hire a researcher to go out and find the information.
Right.
And obviously, since we did that, plus the Army did review it, we were very convinced that while it's very, I think, damning in some instances, and the information may precede the previous public knowledge of some of this stuff, the basic premise and the basic issues are not new. Everything we talk about in that book is somewhere out there already.
Yeah, that's what's really interesting. I mean, some of this stuff is was out there in terms of like leaks, some of what was found in WikiLeaks, things like that.
Right.
If we could, before we get into the book, tell us, how did you get into Spycraft? What was it that really piqued your interest in that, and tell us how you got into that.
Well, just briefly, I grew up in Lisbon, Portugal, and my dad was with the embassy there, and as a teenager going through school, you get exposed to a lot of ongoing things. I mean, it's just you get to see things.
Right.
And one of the aspects of embassy life, being close to the embassy there, was just watching the spy stuff going on. I mean, it was fairly obvious. You could figure it out pretty quickly once you figured out who the players were. So over the years, the time I was there, I got to see a lot of the stuff, and it really did intrigue me. So in the end, I do believe what I observed in high school and being around the embassy community and a lot of the spying and intrigue going on.
Right. So you grew up with it. You grew up with it then.
I'm sorry.
So you grew up with it then.
I kind of grew up with it. Yeah, I think that's a good way of summarizing it. I did see it. I did. I was very much intrigued by it. So yeah, I think growing up around it helped me develop an interest in it.
All right. Well, getting into the book, what I find fascinating about this book, in terms of comparing it with other works in this genre, if you read something like Victor Marchetti's book, it's very dry. It's very technical for
Right.
this kind of a thing. And what your book does is it presents it in a very narrative form. And so this is you on the ground, your experiences firsthand. And so it literally almost reads like a Robert Ludlum novel. I mean, it's exciting, And I think that makes.
Well, we designed it that way. I mean,
right.
Yeah, and frankly, I wanted the book to be something different. When we finally contracted to do the book, the publisher, Thomas Dunn Books, part of St. Martin's, really wanted something different, and I wanted to do something different.
Right.
So the two things we wanted to do through the book and the way it was done is, first off, idea of what it's like to live, up front and personal, with, going to war, what it's like to be
Right.
there, what you go through, how you think. And so, as obviously as you read, and I appreciate your comments, I wanted people to feel like it felt to be, Tony Shaffer going through this stuff. And secondly, I tend to believe that people will remember things, lessons, and information better if they find it enjoyable to read. So the idea was, I hate to say we wanted to sugarcoat history. We kind of
Right.
wanted to sugarcoat history. We wanted to make it so that people would read it and come away with an understanding that's deeper than just simply reading something technical.
Right.
So that was actually something we intended, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because we actually did want to make it a very good read, outside of the fact that, hopefully people are learning things about the war at the same time they're enjoying the actual action adventure.
Right. And another thing about it, the parts that are censored or taken out, you can still read the book, and it doesn't destroy the meaning, or you can still get through it. It's still sensible, even though significant portions are deleted.
And I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think that most folks have found it to be true, that you still figure out what's going on pretty easily. And
Right.
Frankly, there's going to be some new articles coming out here in the very near future I'm aware of that's going to help put the pieces back together. So, I think over the next 2 months, people are going to be able to have a really good idea of the rest of the story.
Right.
There's been an investigative journalist named Peter Lance who's been doing some research on the book, and I understand he's about to complete an article which will complement and enhance the New York Times article on what was taken out. So
Right.
I expect that to be out here shortly. And the other thing is, obviously, the lawsuit. We're now literally in the final stages of planning a lawsuit against DOD over First Amendment violations. And this is no surprise. We've actually announced this. The LA Times did an article on this about a month ago when we first announced our intent to do a lawsuit. And that lawsuit may be further complicated by the fact that the Department of Defense is probably not going to be very happy about the way we're going to approach this. By the fact that I think we'll be able to very credibly and very quickly prove that the First Amendment issues relating to my ability to have free speech
Right.
were just trampled on.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think you've already realized is that by the fact that some copies of the book unredacted didn't make it out,
Right.
by the benefit of the way DOD did its actions. Therefore, there's really the presumption is, of course, that since they did that, and the book is still available, and oh, by the way, there's been no security violations or breaches or anyone dying or anything bad happening.
Right.
It's kind of self-apparent that the book really wasn't that big a security risk to DOD.
And causing such a media storm about it. I mean, doesn't that even seem to sort of have a sort of reverse effect? I mean,
It absolutely did, and frankly, I warned the Army leadership who I was dealing with on this issue before they did what they did. I was actually at Army Reserve duty yesterday, and one of the funny things is that in August, early August, when this all first started happening, the Defense Intelligence Agency forced the Army to withdraw the approval for me to print the book. And this letter that they gave, by the way, this letter is actually available on FoxNews.com as part of their article on this issue.
uh-huh.
The DIA article the letter basically said if this book is published, the free world's going to fall. And I told the Army when I received this letter, it's like, this is not going to work.
Right.
Since I am a media guy, I'm a spokesman for a think tank. I've become a student of public affairs and the media.
Right.
And obviously one of the first things is, as you've already learned from watching the book, the last thing you want to do if you want to suppress something is draw attention to it.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what they ended up doing.
Absolutely. Well, let's transitioning into the book. It's titled Spycraft. The subtitle is Spycraft and Special Ops on the Front Lines of Afghanistan and the Path to Victory. And as you get into the first few chapters, you talk about how you got interested in spycraft, so forth, so on. And you mention the dark arts and being sort of part of an elite squad that needs to engage in subterfuge, counterintelligence. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, there's always been, and I think it's been semi-accurately referred to as the second oldest profession. You've always had, as long as you've had people, and you've always had spying and the desire to figure what is doing. So
Right.
espionage espionage and all the things that go with espionage, spying is the common term, is one of the darkest arts. And there are those out there who learn the dark arts, and they apply them for any number of purposes. The government, whenever they take someone and turn them into an operative, they spend a lot of money. It's very expensive training.
Right.
Not quite as expensive as training someone to be a pilot, but it's very close. And they teach you, they enhance your skills. They give you skills. They enhance the ones you have. And in the end, like a gun can be used for good or bad purposes.
Sure.
The same thing can be said of the skills they give you as an operative. And I think that's been one of the observations I've made over the years, is that people can choose to use those arts and those capabilities for purposes of self-enrichment, manipulation of others, or you can try as best you can, and obviously it's one of those things, no one's perfect.
Right.
You can try the best you can to focus those capabilities on the primary purpose of why they give it to you, is trying to protect the country and do things to enhance our knowledge of the adversary. So that's really what Spycraft is, the espionage idea is, and of course that's why I think that the Jedi Knight Sith comparison is apt for the purposes of the intelligence community.
Which is why I was making a dumb joke. I was wondering whether you were talking about referring to you guys as Jedi. I don't know. I didn't know if you were Mace Windu or Obi-Wan or were you Darth Vader.
I most certainly hope I'm not Darth Vader. But, I'd like to believe that I was on the light side of the Force.
Well, Darth ended up good. He ended up good in the end, though.
Well, yeah, after a long way. But I think everybody has their path between lightness and darkness.
I agree. Right.
And I think that basically the search for truth is always something that everyone should be. I'd like to believe is focused on as one of their focuses in life. And
absolutely.
And frankly, that's one of the things I think people, even in the intelligence community, tend to tend to lose track of is what's the truth.
Right.
And over the years, it's been obvious that intelligence officers have been, their operations have become politicized, which, as was apparent during the build-up to the Iraq invasion, as I'd like to believe I was successful in illustrating in my book, that where the truth and what you find out, regarding the adversary is not necessarily what people want to hear. And when that happens, obviously there are consequences. And this especially is true when policy, the policy of a given administration becomes conflicted with the intelligence. So this is where, you really got to have folks who are willing to stand up and say, no, this is really the truth, this is what you need to pay attention to, rather than those who will then bend the intelligence around whatever the policy is. And this is, again, where I think, there are good forces and bad forces out there, and I'd like to believe that the Jedi Knights were the type of folks folks I worked with were most alike within that Star Wars comparison.
Right. Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, we're in trouble if not.
Oh, we're in trouble. Just the question is how deep we are. So, but I think, again, hopefully, people will come around and understand, especially within the policymaking community, it's more important to listen to the truth and accept bad news for what it is, rather than trying to pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, you mentioned that one of the first things you talk about is when you got to Afghanistan, and there were kids that were using the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, and throwing them under, running up to you. And I would imagine that you talk about almost having to possibly shoot a kid right when you got there.
Right. Exactly.
The mental strain, I would think that you would have to go through, would be something that I think most people just could not even conceive of. Is it something that you continually struggle with, or is it something that you just deal with, or how does that work for you?
That's a good question. Let me answer it 2 parts. First, the Army has had a huge problem with post-traumatic stress.
Right.
That is very clear. That it is an issue that's happened time and time again. Has been, I think, most easily recognized by the number of suicides that have happened.
Right.
Those who did not commit suicide are not necessarily any worse off. It's just that they suffer in silence all the time, and that's an issue. And as for me, the stress of what happened, frankly, it's always going to be there a bit.
Right.
You always think back. You think you could have done things differently or better. Even in those situations, you wonder about what could have been and obviously other folks who were killed there over the time I was there, and I was, I was fine. And so you always wonder about that. I think, frankly, the biggest stress comes from dealing with folks who really don't care about the war. It's really, I think, sad that, people come back here and they have, even now in the Army, there's a very clear trend where I think the Army's trying to make improvements, but there are those who just don't care about the service, the stress people go through, and they are more than happy to add to it. And so this is one of those things I think the Army is slowly changing, but not as quickly as it should.
Right.
That's the biggest thing is when people go through that, they come back and they face the real world, and people are totally, I guess, unsympathetic to the issues relating to that. And I think that's where there needs to be some changes made, and there are some changes being made.
Well, it's as if... Go ahead.
Okay.
No, you go ahead. Well, it's as if in Washington there's just such a culture of corruption that Kissinger talks about soldiers being cannon fodder. There's apparently no concern about the use of depleted uranium, stuff like that on the troops. And so that and I have so many friends that signed up and have come back with problems as well. And so there just seems to be little concern. We read too about the veterans benefits being taken away. Trouble getting benefits, stuff like that. So it's as if there's just once you turn to the dark side, it's just a completely internally corrosive, in other words, it just destroys the whole thing. But it doesn't just get,
absolutely.
The whole thing rots from the head down.
Yeah, I agree. That's what the Japanese saying, that, the head of the fish rots from the fish head rots from the head. I think that's where a lot of the problems we face today. And the other thing is, there's a presumption of, basically, not presumption, I think disregard's a better word, disregard for anything relating to what's right and best, and politics, and the presumption of almost this imperial Washington rules the day. I see that every day.
Right.
I see this imperial attitude from a lot of the policymakers, even now, and I'm hoping that this will change a little bit with the incoming Republican House.
Right.
But and I think, frankly, this TSA groping thing.
I was going to ask you about that. Right.
Due to this arrogance, I got to be honest with you. I think the whole groping thing is just loony. I am all for the idea, and I'll be blunt, the idea of profiling people.
I agree.
Of looking for certain trends, certain people.
Absolutely.
There's certain behaviors. It doesn't matter who you are. That tend to telegraph what you're doing. And the Israelis have been very good about setting up a process where people have to think. They talk to you.
Right.
They will find out what you're doing, where you've been. And I think, if the questioning is done correctly, they'll let you go. It's not like they're going to hold you or anything. But the idea of holding everybody, to make everybody the same, everybody from your 8-year-old grandma to a 5-year-old kid, all have to be treated as threats, to me is total lunacy.
Right, yeah.
And this is beyond the pale, and it doesn't work. Anyway, but this is a symptom of this larger imperial idea that Washington knows best, and they're going to tell you what to do no matter what.
Right. And would you go far as to say that it's actually, is it just sort of a corrupt thing where guys who run the body scanner companies are having them put in, or is it even a further level of sort of dehumanization?
I think there's some politics there relating to who makes money off of it, absolutely. But I think beyond that, there's a culture of just of the attitude of Washington.
Right.
Where I've observed some things over the last 2 days where it's been made very clear to me that, for example, certain folks just don't care about me and my attitude and the fact of speaking out. And it's very clear to me that folks out there are going to do some things to try to come after me at some point in time relating to the fact that certain folks in D.C. don't like being criticized.
Sure.
So I think it comes down to any criticism, no matter how well-meaning, no matter how detailed or factual, is just not accepted by the administration or more importantly, the bureaucracy.
Right.
There's really 3 parts in this country. There's the Democrats, Republicans, and then there's the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is that which goes from administration to administration and really does tend to begin to take on a life of its own. So when you combine, this almost imperial culture that exists within the government with leadership who really wants to basically tell people what they should do and really not do what's necessary to do the right thing, to lump everybody together, I think it's, is a sad truth, but the truth is this: the truth in Washington D.C. is negotiable, and it just shouldn't be that way.
Right. Well, and the other thing about your book is that you're not a war hawk. I mean, you're talking about a solution to what's going on in Afghanistan, and in the epilogue you give realistic solutions for somebody who's been there firsthand, and so it's not just some bureaucrat in a cubicle in Washington thousands of miles away. I mean, you've been there, and so you have I would think a much better analysis of what's a realistic solution than just perpetuating the conflict.
Well, we've got to do something to mitigate. I mean, this is your point is well taken, and this is this is the issue as I see it. We have some of the best and brightest of our youth dying over there right now,
right,
with no real hope of making a long-term impact. I'm not saying we can't win militarily. We will go in and we'll do what we can to win.
Right.
I think we do it very well. The problem is holding and building. And I was actually on Fox News today at 12:30 talking about this very issue, by the fact that there's an appearance that there's a disregard for the long-term consequences of what we're doing there. And this is how I would term that. The bottom line is this: that we have two organizations, two groups essentially right now, the Karzai administration and the Taliban.
Right.
And it's like the Hatfields and McCoys. These folks, tribes have fought each other for 2,000 years, long before the Muslim faith or the radical Muslim elements ever came there.
Right.
And so we're ignoring the obvious by the fact that we recognize this as an issue. And the other thing is the real threat, as everybody keeps talking about, but no one seems willing to do anything about, is in Pakistan. And despite the agreement that the Pakistani army would jump in earlier this year so there could be a cohesive, effort made on both sides of the border to stop the Taliban, they're now talking about another 6-month delay. So we're talking about 18 months after they promised to do something, they've not done it.
Right.
So you've got to ask yourself whose side they're on, what the $7 billion a year we're giving them is buying us, and ultimately what is guaranteeing that they're going to remain stable as a power by the fact that they have nuclear weapons. So we've got to do something to win this. I'm arguing there are things we can do to win this.
Right.
It's going to take some hard decisions. You have to you have to have a great deal of fortitude. And instead of looking at how we lost Vietnam, we need to look at how we won World War II. And I think, frankly, there's some lessons there that we could use to bring, diplomatic and military things together to win.
Right. Well, you even mentioned the fact that the Soviets have been there, the British have been there, and they seem to have been doing the same types of things that we're doing, and they did not fare well there. So, you bring that out very well. Do you think that can we talk about Able Danger, because you've got a chapter in there about that that's really fascinating too, as well as the chapter as a great title, They're Really Pissed at You. That's a good title chapter. Tell us why they were really pissed at you. Not everybody who's going to be one of my readers. I have a lot of nerdy literature, philosophy types.
Well,
they're not going to know about Able, so tell us about that.
Well, first off, look, I've been told by a lot of friends that people either love me or hate me, and I've accepted that a long time ago, because I tend to push the envelope. I tend to
me too.
To not be demure. I tend to try to mix things up. I'm not one who's going to sit back. I want to be part of it, and I want to see things change, especially if things are wrong. So I've always been a incendiary figure within, for my past 25 years. That incendiary figure, whatever you want to call it, has served me well at times, because it has allowed me to get in positions to make things happen.
Right.
And one of the grand ironies, of course, of being an intelligence officer, you can never talk about those operations which are most successful. So, with that said, the whole metaphor of They're Really Pissed at You was the fact that during the tour in Afghanistan, I blew the whistle on an operation known as Able Danger.
Right.
Able Danger was an offensive operation which was designed to target Al-Qaeda globally by the Special Operations Command a full 2 years before 9/11. That is to say that we started looking at Al-Qaeda as a threat in 1999. And during that 2-year run-up to 2001, there was a lot of work done to define and basically map Al-Qaeda as an organization.
Right.
And anytime you have a military operation, you want to understand the threat in great detail. With Al-Qaeda, the problem was they really don't have a country they sit in. They're a global threat. So we had to do something called data mining and some other advanced using some other advanced technology to help kind of understand their social networks.
Right.
So this was way ahead of its time. I mean, obviously, And so what happened was we identified Mohammed Atta and at least two of the three cells which conducted the 9/11 attacks. Let me be very clear for your listeners. We didn't know what they were doing. We just recognized they were here.
The presence, right.
And they basically, Al-Qaeda had cells operating within the United States. So that was the big headline. We didn't have the other pieces of the puzzle to tell us about the aviation training and some of the other things. We just recognized the fact that these folks were operating in cells and they were here.
Right.
And that is the crux of the information which I attempted to have Special Operations Command pass to the FBI. And ultimately it was not passed for some political decisions of lawyers at DOD, and the rest is obviously history. So the big thing about the book, the big reveal in the book is my meeting at Bagram in 2003, obviously
right.
well after 9/11, and my discussion with Dr. Philip Zelikow, the staff director of the 9/11 Commission. So that is the issue which was presented to me, the option of briefing these folks, so I obtained permission from the Army to do that. And in the end, obviously it was not well received, and certain folks at the Defense Intelligence Agency chose to come after me and make sure that I was to be ostracized and fired from the intelligence community for doing this sort of thing. So
right.
That was the bottom line there.
Well, and it brings to mind the situation with Sybil Edmonds, which was roughly around that same time with the FBI when she
right.
Stumbled
right.
on similar types of info, and apparently nothing was done.
Yeah, and I know Sybil, and yes, that is factually correct that she did have similar things, and I think in some ways her information was far more compelling by the fact that she was a linguist and she was translating information that was actually intercepted from sources. So yeah, I do, and it was during the same time frame where I think it's very clear that a lot more could have been done, and I've argued several times. And I actually testified to this fact in 2006 in front of Congress.
Right.
That I do believe the 9/11 attacks were preventable, and easily so, had all the pieces been brought together. And it wasn't, frankly, it was not a policy, it was not an intelligence problem, it was a policy problem.
Right.
Policies of that day prevented people from talking adequately and quickly about information which was available. I argue that fundamentally we have not changed. Things are not that much better. As a matter of fact, I think in some ways they're worse because we've not fixed the problem. We just added layers of bureaucracy to it, and I think that's where
exactly.
we're right now.
Right. And that's I'm not necessarily saying that a large state is bad per se, but one of the problems with a large state is bureaucracy. I mean, that's historically the case with civilizations. Writers talk about this, and that's one of the best things about your book is that, again, you're coming at this from a realistic perspective and talking about how things are, not progressing because of the fact of just overweighted bureaucracy everywhere.
Right.
I find it you have so many interesting, I guess, pop culture references that I find really fascinating. You talk about not just Star Wars, but you mentioned Mr. White, Mr. Gray, Mr. Pink. Now, is that a Quentin Tarantino reference? Where was that from?
Yeah, that was from the Reservoir Dogs.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
Right.
And you talk about in Operation Dark Heart itself. You mentioned Apocalypse Now, and you mentioned the Joseph Conrad story. And so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was. I mean, I think this is one of those grand ironies. The issue related to I was relaxing. It's kind of funny. I would relax after missions by watching 24 and Apocalypse Now. I think it's a little bit ironic.
Yeah, anyway, it's not right.
That said, I was watching one of the scenes in Apocalypse Now where Colonel McCurdy's played by Marlon Brando is talking to Martin Sheen's character Captain Willard.
Right.
And he talks about the horror, the usefulness of mortal terror. And it came to me, it's like, that's what we need to do. Operation Dark Heart is actually an operation which was designed to allow us to go into Pakistan, into the Taliban safe havens,
right,
and destabilize them, to make them worried about their own mortality. And we're going to do that in some very complex ways. We're special operations guys. We're going to do this. I can't go into all the details, obviously, but we had a real deep and precise plan to do this. And obviously, one of the things I'm not for the drone program, for the very fact I think you kill too many civilians. Our program is going to be very precise, very surgical,
right,
and focused on a place we call the Al Qaeda Hotel, which was the command and control node for both Al Qaeda and the Taliban within the area we were targeting. So, frankly, the intent was to buy more time. And I'm not saying in any instance that Operation Darkheart would have won the war. All I'm saying is this was the tipping point.
Yeah.
By the fact we knew what we were doing, we had the adversary on the ropes.
Right.
To not keep him there, and we allowed him to start resurgence, which resulted in the current insurgency, which is now strengthened, probably as strong as it's ever been right now. And obviously, the book talks about the tipping point, and the
right.
point being when Operation Darkheart was abandoned by then Lieutenant General Barna, who was Commander of Forces. And I'd like to believe I was able to illustrate the meeting I had with him and the issues that were before us in good detail by the way I present the information on that.
Here's an interesting question. You say that it's an intelligence clue that no one has claimed the $25 million reward for Bin Laden. And
right.
we hear
right.
we hear through the media quite often. Bin Laden seems to pop up, almost indefinitely. He's always sort of popping up. What do you make of that?
Right.
What's your analysis of that?
Well, I do believe Bin Laden's still alive. I believe a lot of folks are vested in his staying alive.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, I think I would much rather see us capture him than kill him. I do dispute Eric Holder. About a year ago, he made the comment that, we're just going to kill him no matter what. And and even General McChrystal, who was then commander of forces in Afghanistan, said, no, if we can catch him, we're going to catch him. We don't want to make these guys martyrs. So I believe other forces like the Pakistanis do want him to be alive by the fact that we continue to give them billions of dollars now. And I think they are pretty clear on the fact that once we get him, we're leaving. And I'm not saying that we're leaving completely, because I don't think we can afford to ever leave that area completely again. With that said, we will not stay there and be spending $7 billion a year on their economy if we don't have to. And so the last group, I think, that really has a best interest, if you may be surprised by this, is the Iranians. The Iranians, I think, have every interest in maintaining an adversary who makes life miserable for us. So they may not necessarily like him. I mean, they are Persians, he's an Arab, but the bottom line is obviously the enemy of my enemy
is a friend. Absolutely, that's what I was about to say. Yeah.
So I think it really does. I think they have obvious interest in keeping him alive if they can. So.
Yeah, and as you well know, I mean, such things obviously require playing other groups off against other groups. So it doesn't even have to be it's you against the other person. If you can bring in other multiple targets that aren't even on your side, it's a deflection.
Right. Absolutely.
So you lay out strategies for success. Tell us some of those. Where is the current policy failing, and what do you suggest?
Well, it's failing in three areas. First, I think this is a pretty apparent lesson from World War II. Just don't tell your enemy what you're doing.
Yeah.
And we tend to do that in droves. I mean, when we did the surge last year, we exactly lined out what 5 provinces we're putting the officers in. We told them when they're coming. I mean, we didn't do that for the Germans during D-Day in World War II.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah, you mentioned
and
that.
So we're kind of playing. Yeah, we're kind of playing to the Taliban timeline. So this is where we're just not being smart. And the second issue relating to policy is this whole timeline issue. We continue to draw this artificial line in the sand saying we must have things done by this date. I said today on Fox that basically had the president used 2014 as the timeline, potential withdrawal date back when he did his speech in West Point 2009, I don't think we'd be as bad off as we are, because I think that the timeline he drew in the sand for the Taliban next year is what helped embolden them. I think it encouraged them, and they've continued to gain ground like that.
Right.
Third, and most importantly, we have failed to recognize the fact that this is a tribal war.
Yeah. Yeah.
The fact that these tribes have been fighting each other
for 1,000 years, right?
Well before, yeah, and we continue to misread, and the idea of instilling a Jeffersonian-style democracy in a 10th century culture is just beyond me.
It's absurd, yeah.
So, and they talk about turning, this is one of those grand ironies. They talk about, we need to turn security back over to the Afghan authorities by 2014. Well, I hate to tell them, the Afghan authorities are already in charge. It's called the Taliban. They've established a shadow government. It's just not the government we want in place. So this is where, we've got to accept some very brutal facts here that we kind of missed the boat on that. And Taliban aren't going away unless we plan on doing genocide of 20 million Pashtun.
Right.
I don't think we're going to do that. So, we've got to allow for the fact that these folks are Afghans. This needs to be an Afghan solution. And the more we insinuate ourselves with the Karzai government, the more we become the target of the anger of the people. And again, I think that's why the Taliban continues to make headway. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's supposed to be an Afghan review in December. Frankly, I'll be surprised if it isn't all rainbows and roses. But the fact is this: I think there's some local gains have been made where our forces are. But this is the bottom line: there ain't no more forces coming. So if this is the best we can do, and we're still not gaining ground as quick as we have to, then the chances are we need to change strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the success that was had with the Irish Republican Army and those types of attacks, and how the strategies that you're talking about were somewhat successful with that ordeal, and it makes sense, here as well. Do you foresee winning this case? Do you foresee being able to speak your mind more freely, or how do you see this going?
You mean for me personally, or for the war issue?
I'm sorry, for your you were talking about suing the Defense Department and so forth.
Oh, well, it's always a battle. When I was in the Fox Green Room about 5 years ago, when Senator Trent Lott was there, and there's two lessons he taught me. First, he looked over and said, "Hey, Colonel Shaffer, I've been watching you. Do you mind if I give you some advice?" And the first thing he said was, the first lesson you already know is it's never good to be right ahead of your time, and that was a tough lesson to learn. I've learned that. Secondly, the real issue is always something else. So the real issue that we're looking at here is eluding us, and regarding my book. The bottom line is a lot of folks are unhappy with it. I think we're going to be able to sue and get the unredacted copy out probably sometime next year. I'm not sure when, but I'm very sure that we're going to be able to deal with getting a lot more information out very quickly. The bottom line is this: fighting the bureaucracy, as I've come to find, is never easy. It wasn't easy when I was running intelligence operations. It's not easy now. As much as I appreciate the comments from you and others who have read and enjoyed the book, there's a number of folks who are just not happy about the way the book has been received, and it's very clear that there's going to be an attempt. There's going to be attempts and consequences on my behalf of DoD. Still, they're not done, and I think most folks understand that.
But you foresee being successful though. You foresee being successful in getting more information out.
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
I think most, even as liberal as the courts are in many instances, I think this is one area they should be very liberal on, and I'm very sure that they're going to be very offended by the way DoD took information which is clearly and easily shown to be unclassified from sources which are already in the public domain, and frankly, some of the information they pulled out of the book were about civilian officials, which are unclassified, by the way. They're sitting here, in my office right now.
Right.
So it's just loony to think that some of the stuff was claimed to be harmful to national security.
Yeah.
Which clearly one of the issues DoD has continued to do is they always try to mitigate bad information or negative information that has nothing to do with security, but everything to do with things which may be embarrassing or less than favorable. And I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, liberals are stupid, so there's nothing to worry about. You can outsmart them in the end, I'm sure.
Well, I know there's a battle coming, and multiple fronts. So anytime you and others can support, keeping the information coming and trying to keep the lights on, it's always appreciated.
Well, I just wish we had more, conservative minded patriots like you in the positions that you have. I think that's a glimmer of hope. What do you before we let you go? What do you think about WikiLeaks and the war logs and all that? Do you see it as something harmful, or what's your take on that?
I got to tell you, I'll be honest with you, I've met Julian Assange, and I don't like him. I'm not saying I don't like him because he's not a good guy. I don't know him personally, but I don't like what he stands for, and there's two reasons. First, there's a quote which I do believe he said. I wasn't there when he said it, but he said, my job is to end two wars. And it's kind of like, wow, I wonder if, like, asking to do that or someone whispered in his ear, because, ending two wars, as much as I think it's good to end them, think that he's going to do it is a bit beyond the pale. Secondly, there are legitimate ways of getting information in front of folks regarding whistleblowing.
Yeah.
And I've been a big supporter of whistleblowers. I'm currently, I work with Project and Government Oversight and another organization called Judicial Watch, which are,
yes, yeah,
privately funded organizations which do what they believe is necessary to ensure the continuation of our democracy. And the whistleblowing and getting the truth out is very important to that. And frankly, they're linked into Congress. They have people. They have support bases. They are widely read. Mr. Assange did not choose to do anything like that. He chose to take information and basically poke people in the eye with it, further ensuring that no one's going to listen to him, because he's basically pissed them all off. So, the last thing you're going to do is cooperate with someone who's just poked you in the eye.
Yeah.
And that's what he's done by the way he's released information. So instead of trying to work cooperatively with people who could help him get some of these things resolved, what he's done is create a situation where he's essentially literally on the run now. And a lot of folks just are not going to take any action to help him because of the way he did it. So I think that he could have done a lot of good. I think that the idea of putting information into the public sector that he did is not bad. I don't think that the treasure trove of documents that he released really, number one, were all that important. Number two,
right,
had the impact I think he wanted them to have. But it does prove, and the one positive point of all this, as does my book, it does prove that overclassifies everything. That you could probably have about 80% of what's classified, and it would never, ever have any negative impact on our ability to conduct military operations. So much of it, unfortunately, is focused on covering one's butt and protecting the guilty, rather than trying to account for what goes wrong.
Fascinating. Well, the book is Operation Dark Heart, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer, and is it OperationDarkHeart.com? Is that where people need to go?
Yes, they can go to OperationDarkHeart.com. As a matter of fact, we're selling autographed copies for Christmas through the books through the site.
Awesome.
I'll be doing signings, which obviously will be on the both OperationDarkHeart.com, and those of you like you, or friends of mine on Facebook. Always check Facebook.